Okay, so here we are, guys, back again. It is June 25th, 2020. Can't believe it. We are on part 2 of our 2-part series on Revelation chapter 17, Mystery Babylon. And yeah, we've been piloting through the book of Revelation since January of 2020, and man, has the world changed from night to day, from Revelation chapter 1 to here we are, Revelation chapter 17. So, without further ado, we'll have Rod, who canceled a very important meeting to get here to be able to help us out with the scripture reading tonight. So we thank you for that, Rod. So go ahead, brother, and open us up in a word of prayer here.
All right, dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to come together to share your word, to learn your word, and to study your word in depth. We pray that you rest our souls, rest our hearts from our busy day, so that our minds and our hearts and our souls will concentrate and focus on your word and what you have to bestow upon us, to lay on our ears, lay on our hearts, so that we may obey your word, understand your word, and take that word and share it with others. May you bless her today so that he can pass forward all that you have to bring knowledge forward to us. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
All right, so, okay, without further ado, last week we had basically the introductory background overview of Mystery Babylon. So we went through that at length. What I'll do is I'll just recap and re-summarize for anybody that's joining us this week and didn't catch last week, but it is on YouTube at South Beach Gospel Ministries. So you can look at that on our YouTube page, click on that, and we'll get algorithmed up in the Google Analytics, so more people will get it fed to their Facebook, YouTube pages. And Genevieve was telling us earlier this week, I think she said we passed 11,200 or something. So we got at least 1,200 views just on our Ustream IBM site, which is where southbeachgospel.com is warehoused. So anyway, all right. So let's jump right into it. Last week we talked about Mystery Babylon. And I explained how these two excellent books, the Two Babylons by the late Alexander Hislop, which was written in the late 1800s, and kind of got him put on the black market for a while. And another excellent book by one of my favorite Christian writers, Dave Hunt, A Woman Rides the Beast. Yeah, excellent book there. Both support the proposition that Mystery Babylon is presently warehoused in the Roman Catholic Church. But as I said before, Mystery Babylon is more than that. Dave Hunt and Reverend Hislop are correct that the Roman Catholic Church, which is the largest Christian denomination with over 1 billion people, over 1 billion with a B, really always from the very beginning was always just ancient Babylonian paganism. That normally I say started with the Tower of Babel, with Nimrod and Semiramis, but actually it didn't. It started even before that. So let's go ahead and look at my little timeline chart that I made to help us go through this. And as we can see here, that, oh great, my pointer's showing up. Mystery Babylon, the religious system, really starts not in, the Tower of Babel with Nimrod, but actually starts in the Garden of Eden, with Adam being away from his wife Eve. Satan, in the form of the serpent, approached her in the very beginning chapters of Genesis chapter 3. And Steve, you could probably just read that real quick. Yeah. And I would kind of just catch up people that didn't get a chance to be here last week. Read for us verses 1 through 4.
Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God had said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die.
Go ahead and read verse 5 for me.
For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil.
And now we get to the next verse, and that is where I would submit to you, Mystery Babylon really gets its horrible start. Verse 6.
And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired, to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof, and did eat it, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat.
And it goes on to say in verse 7, and the eyes of both of them were open, and they knew that they were naked. So what we see then is Eve gets approached, and she says, when she saw that the tree was good for food, it's going to taste yummy, so it's tempting. That it was pleasant to the eyes, it's beautiful. Oh. But more importantly, it was a tree desirable to make one wise. That's where you get the term the Illuminati. The illumined ones means the enlightened ones into the hidden knowledges of the occult that God tried to hide from Adam and Eve. She became the first wicked, the first witch, if you will, and also the first tool of Satan in this whole mystery Babylon, goddess-based diatribe where God set up Adam as, if we had time, we would look at Genesis chapter 2. And what we'll do is we'll do a standalone, like we used to do years back, a standalone Mystery Babylon teaching when we conclude the book of Revelation. But just to quickly recap, if you looked at Genesis chapter 2, you would see that God created Adam, a man in his own image, and created the woman as a helpmate to him from the man's side. And that the man, Adam, was given the authority to run the world on behalf of God. And the wife was supposed to be his helpmeet to help him, with loneliness and things of that nature. Satan comes along in the form of the serpent and offers Eve an opportunity for herself to exalt herself to the first goddess position. That hidden knowledge, that occultic knowledge, would make her wise. It would make her, as Satan said, it'll make you like God. You can become just like God. But since you're a female, you'll be the first goddess in the whole universe. And so the ugly idea of goddesshood first begins with the fall in the Garden of Eden. And it was Eve that got Adam to go along and eat the fruit which caused the fall of the human race. Satan didn't trick him. Satan didn't tempt him. Satan didn't interact with him at all. It was Satan interacting with the woman, offering her goddesshood, which once she signed on the deal, well, as part of the deal, you got to get your husband to go along. He's unreasonable and he won't talk to me. There you have it. The beginning of Mystery Babylon starts there. Now what you have happened, that's about 4000 BC. You have the flood of Noah occurs, and during this time from about 4000 BC to 2400 BC, what you have is Satan starting another intrigue against the plan of God to have the human race in the form of the man dominate and populate the earth, which is what he commanded them to do when he cast Adam and Eve out of the garden. He said, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth with little people that will grow up into adults. And eventually our destiny was to reign and rule with Jesus Christ over all the angels, including Lucifer and the cherubim and the seraphim. And so Satan started out with another intrigue or program to interrupt God's plan for the human race. And that was the plan related to the Nephilim. Fallen angels came down, cohabited with, again, human women because they were so obsessed with their beauty that they took them wives of all whom they chose. You can read about that in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. As a result, they created a hybrid race of humanoids who were supermen, godmen, the sort of old legends of Greek and Norse mythology, Hercules, and all of those things. That was going on during this period of time from the fall to 2400 BC, whereupon God had to send a flood to destroy the occultic super cities, Atlantis, Lemuria, all of these legendary cities that you've read about from the writings of Plato or Sophocles and these guys, were real places that promoted the practice of occultic knowledge. But we see that one of Noah's sons, after the flood, God wiped out the Nephilim to preserve the human race and the human genome. After the flood, we see that when the new world began, Noah and his sons, Ham, Shem, Japheth, they had kids. And it's believed that Shem was the person that eventually kills the great-grandson of Noah, whose name was Nimrod. So we go from there. The flood of Noah, Ham, Cush. Cush begets Nimrod, the great-grandson of Noah. Nimrod becomes the person who builds the Tower of Babel, and the city of Babylon is established on the banks of the Euphrates River. He becomes the first God-man. We can look at 2 Chronicles chapter 10, you can look at Genesis chapter 10, Genesis chapter 11. You can see that Nimrod was, through occultic knowledge, able to do something to manipulate his own DNA to make himself into a God-man, just like the Nephilim, who were born of human women and fallen angels. And again, because of that, he was worshipped as like a god in human flesh, and Satan used him to reinstitute what we would call now the Mystery Babylon goddess-based worship system. God describes himself, characterizes himself, the word, as a man, and he created a man in his image. The female was taken from out of Adam as a helpmeet to him and is a unique creature. God is never characterized as the feminine or female. Satan, attempting to counteract whatever God does, he imitates it and then he perverts it and reverses it. God is good, Satan is evil. God chooses a man to institute his plans for the people of the planet Earth here on the planet Earth. Satan chooses a woman to institute his plans for the very same target area. And so we have goddesshood versus manhood being raised up. The God of heaven versus the goddesses of heaven. And that battle begins in seriousness and really picks up steam at the Tower of Babel and the city of Babylon. So we know the story at about 1800 BC. Nimrod established the Tower of Babel. God came down, confounded the languages, and forced people to scatter by changing their languages. But what we find out is, as a result of Nimrod being able to manipulate his DNA, he marries an incredibly beautiful woman named Semiramis, and that's where the mythos picks up its very first character type. There was a real woman named Semiramis that was married to a real king of Babylon named Nimrod. And as a result of that, and we went in great detail last week, so I won't go into it again, Semiramis and Nimrod are later archetyped after their deaths by Satan as the fertility goddess, Queen of Heaven, who is able to give birth to a virgin-born God-man who is the reincarnation of the God-man Nimrod, who was killed by Shem, Noah's son. And later, Nimrod is known in other cultures as Gilgamesh, or Sargon, or Marduk, Bel, Anu. Later, the Egyptians would call him Osiris. The Greeks would call him Zeus. The Romans would call him Jupiter. This was a type of Satan, the first person of the satanic counterfeit trinity. And then we have Semiramis, Nimrod's wife, a real woman who did live at one point in time, who later died. After dying, she became known as the Queen of Heaven, the Virgin Mother Earth Goddess, also known as Gaia. The Egyptians called her what? Isis. Ishtar was the name that was used by the Phoenicians and the nations around and surrounding the nation Israel at the time of the establishment of the Kingdom of Israel. Ashtaroth was another name that was used by the nations surrounding Israel at the time of their founding, the Near Eastern countries. And so we see that Semiramis becomes the Queen of Heaven motif that begins to be archetyped, and Satan uses that again and again and again. And so he does supernatural things for these different nation states in the guise of a goddess. I call it Satan dressed in drag. And then supposedly their son, who they did have, Tammuz, Nimrod Semiramis had a son, and he's later deified as well. And he's supposedly born of supernatural sunlight, of which Washington, D.C.'s National Mall is really a monument built to the Semiramis, Nimrod, Tammuz archetypal story. The Capitol Rotunda is the swollen, impregnated belly of Semiramis. The Washington Monument, the spear, or phallic symbol, is really the phallus of Osiris or Nimrod himself under his various names. And then you have the painting inside the Capitol Rotunda of George Washington, the founder, the father of our country, turning into a god. He's painted with other Greek gods on the ceiling of the Capitol Rotunda, and he's doing the as above, so below hand sign as he's levitating up into heaven and surrounding the edges of heaven, watching him turn from a man into a God-man, are not the disciples or Jesus or Moses, but all of the Greek and Roman gods of antiquity. And that is in our nation's capital. So again, the Mystery Babylon system worked its way all the way through right here to the modern day USA. So Tammuz, later is known as Horus to the Egyptian, or Apollo to the Greeks, Baal or Ninus to the Phoenicians and the other Semitic tribes surrounding Israel. He's a type of the Antichrist. Again, that worked its way even into the nation of Israel. And so, again, what is the three-part type that we get from the Mystery Babylon religious system, which we see as the feature of Revelation chapter 17, as opposed to next week's Revelation chapter 18, when we see Babylon as a commercial center used by Satan and the Antichrist. The Mystery Babylon mythos is based on three principles: the dying and resurrected sun god king. That was memorialized in ancient England in the story of Camelot. The story of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. If you study that out, you watch any of the movies made based upon that, or read any of the books written about the Camelot or Gardnerian sort of mythos, King Arthur is a type of Satan and a type of the Antichrist. The dying and resurrected sun god king receives an injury, and it's a fatal wound. As he's slowly dying, the land dies out, and the land is poor and whatever, and Excalibur is stuck in a stone and whatever, and then the king comes back to health, and Excalibur is is freed, and the king, when he's healthy, the land is good, and then when he dies so that the land can be benefited. So I won't go into all of that, but again, even in the legends of the nation of England, which is now Great Britain, was based upon the mythos of the Semiramis, Nimrod, Mystery Babylon, dying and resurrected sun god king, with a virgin queen of heaven, earth mother goddess, and a virgin-born sun god prince, who is the reincarnation or the resurrection of the dying sun god king. And so it works its way into Druidism, Wicca, witchcraft, Satanism, modern-day Freemasonry, Eastern mysticism, Roman Catholicism. We've already talked about that. A woman rides the beast. Dave has pointed out the Catholic Church is really just ancient Babylonian paganism recast as Christianity to make it more acceptable to the people. But even in the nation of Israel, and we didn't really have a chance to talk about that, so Rod, if you will, I want you to flip over to the book of Jeremiah, and we'll see that this Mystery Babylon paradigm that Satan so brilliantly and ingeniously created, and you got to give credit where credit is due, you have to say, he's a wicked, evil genius, and he was even able to get this paradigm in the nation of Israel, God's own people. And so when I was studying this out in the last few days, I was just shocked and amazed when I saw that, man, they were doing pagan worship things like we see in the Catholic Church, and we talked about that at length last week. They were doing that in the temple of God in Israel. So Rod, if you would, flipping over to Jeremiah chapter 7, let's read to start out verses 16 to 18. And again, remember, we're talking about Nimrod, Semiramis, and their supposedly virgin-born God-man son Tammuz. Now, as you go to the different nation-states, the names are changed to confuse the innocent, I would say. And so, remember, we're talking about Satan dressed in drag, using a real person, Nimrod, and a real person, Semiramis, and their real son, Tammuz, and then after their death, reinventing them again and again, and using his own supernatural powers and the powers of other fallen angels to act out, basically, a theater for the deceived, to create competition against the God of the Bible and the Holy Trinity, God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. Hello? Okay, send him up. Thanks. Okay, sorry about that. Albert's here. He'll be upset that you're stealing some of his lines. But I wanted to take time to talk about, and we didn't really do this last week. We didn't do it actually in 2017, the last time we did Revelation 17. But sort of right here in the 1500s BC, between the founding of the nation of Israel and Jesus Christ, Israel itself was involved in the worship and the practice of the Mystery Babylon pagan system that really got its big push and its big start at the Tower of Babel with Nimrod and Semiramis. So, Rod, read for us verses 16 through 18 of Jeremiah chapter 7, and let's see what did Satan do to get his program even into the chosen people of God and into the temple of God.
Jeremiah 7:16. Therefore, pray not thou for this people, neither lift up cry nor prayer for them, neither make intercession to me, for I will not hear thee. Seest thou not what they do in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem? The children gather wood, and the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead their dough, to make cakes to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto their gods, that they may provoke me to anger.
And I was like, man, they're baking cookies to Semiramis? But they didn't know her by the name Semiramis. They knew her by the title, the Queen of Heaven. And the Queen of Heaven, interestingly enough, is exactly the title that's used by the Roman Catholic Church to refer to their fertility sky goddess queen, who is none other than whom, Steve?
Mary.
Mary. Supposedly the Virgin Mary is also called by the same title. Why would a Christian organization name the mother of Jesus after one of the most hated goddess figures in all of ancient Israel? Because it's not a Christian outfit or a Christian organization. So now, let's go ahead and flip over, if we could, to Jeremiah chapter 19. Steve, why don't you go ahead, or whichever one of you guys get there first. We're going to go to Jeremiah chapter 19 and see what else was going on here.
Okay, which verse?
13.
And the houses of Jerusalem and the houses of the kings of Judah shall be defiled as the place of Tophet, because of all the houses upon whose roofs they have burnt incense unto all the host of heaven, and have poured out drink offerings unto other gods.
Okay, and now this Tophet, Steve, so you keep your finger on it. Tophet. What's Tophet? We're going to find out in a few minutes. I'll explain that to you. Jeremiah chapter 44. Rod, if you could, read verses 15 to 19 and give me a little volume so everybody out in internet land can pick you up through the mic.
44, verse 19?
Verse 15 all the way through 19.
15 to 19. Then all the men which knew their wives and burned incense unto other gods, and all the women that stood by, a great multitude, even all the people that dwelt in the land of Egypt, in Pathros, answered Jeremiah, saying, As for the word that thou hast spoken unto us in the name of the Lord, we will not hearken unto thee. But we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings, and our princes in the cities of Judah, and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then had we plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil. But since we left off to burn incense to the Queen of Heaven, and to pour out drink offerings unto her, we have wanted all things, and have been consumed by the sword and by the famine.
Okay, so what we have then, Jeremiah chapter 7, which Rod read. In essence, what that is saying is God is not going to listen to the prayers of the nation Israel anymore. Why? Because they are partaking in the pagan festivals where cakes are baked to the Queen of Heaven, and that's part of a ritual where they're also worshiping the consort of the Queen of Heaven, and in that case, it would be the fire god Molech. What we have in Jeremiah chapter 7 is proof positive that not only did Israel do things like bake cakes to the Queen of Heaven. I was like, well, that could be offensive, God being a jealous God. If you made, chocolate chip cookies for another goddess, he might be a little upset. But he was more upset because not only were they doing that, they were burning the incense. They were burning the incense to cover the smell of the fire sacrifice that they were making. So what Israel was doing was going to the pagan gods, Marduk, who is again another type of Nimrod. He also went by the name Merodach, Chemosh, and the name he's probably most well known under is Moloch. Moloch, Chemosh, and Milcom were fire gods, and how you worship them was by taking your children to the, Steve, you mentioned the word there in Jeremiah chapter 19. What was that word you mentioned?
Tophet.
Tophet. A Tophet was basically a fire chamber that was set up where you would burn your children to death. Israel was doing the Mystery Babylon worship of the Queen of Heaven by baking cakes to her and burning incense to cover up the smell from when they offered their children to her husband, whether it be Milcom, Moloch, or Chemosh. It's really Nimrod and Semiramis, Satan dressed in drag under another name. They were burning their kids to death. And so this Tophet thing, I was looking it up, what exactly is that? And what it is exactly is this very same thing that we find in the New Testament, which is called, I looked it up and I was like, man, Tophet, doggone it. Let me look this up and see what it is. And so I eventually got myself to the book of Judges, and so let's go ahead and whichever one of you guys gets there first, let's have you guys take a look at the book of Judges, and we'll see in Judges chapter 2, if somebody could flip there and read for us 11 through 15, Albert.
Okay, so Israel's apostasy.
Man, you got there quick.
Well, I have a great teacher, so I have to be proficient, efficient, and effective.
You're the man, Albert.
And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam. And they forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed other gods, of the gods of the people that were round about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. And they forsook the Lord, and served Baal and Ashtaroth. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of spoilers that spoiled them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so that they could not any longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn unto them, and they were greatly distressed.
Okay, so as Albert pointed out to us with such vigor, he said the children of Israel were doing evil in the sight of the Lord because they were serving the Baalim. The Baalim is the plural form of the god Baal. Baal is another name for Chemosh or Moloch or any one of a number of the male god, the sun god king that really was Nimrod back in the day. And since he could appear in different forms, he was kind of sort of the Semitic or Phoenician type of like the god of thunder Thor of Norse mythology. He could take on different forms. So he would be referred to in the plural form as Baalim. They worshiped the Baalim, whether he be in this form or that form. And I just want to read real quickly the commentary notes for that passage that Albert just read. I thought it was really interesting, and it really pointed out to me, wow, wait a minute. All these years, I thought Israel was burning some incense, and the women, because they were sentimental, were baking cakes to the Queen of Heaven to commemorate the death of Tammuz, which is, the son of Nimrod and Semiramis, and that was offensive to God. But they were also burning their children to death. And so this is what the commentator says on this passage. He says, Baal was the chief deity of ancient Canaan. His exploits and licentious worship practices are well documented in the literature of ancient Ugarit, which was, ancient city in Mesopotamia. The son of El, Baal was both a heroic figure as a storm god and a fertility deity who was worshipped in many cult centers in various forms and emphasis, hence the term Baalim, or the plural form. Then he goes on to say, Ashtaroth, also known as Ashtoreth, was also known in the literature of the Ugaritic people and of the Phoenician people. And it goes on to say, Ashtaroth was a goddess of erotic love and war, and she was known elsewhere in the ancient Near East as Ishtar or Astarte. All of these names are really Semiramis taking on her different forms. And it goes on to point out, the veneration of this goddess entered into the Mediterranean world under the name of Astarte, and the practices associated with her cult became associated with the Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite. We're all familiar with Aphrodite, the god of sexuality and romance. She was also, called by different names. The Canaanite worship rites were carried out not only in temples, but on every high hill and under every green tree, quoting 2 Kings chapter 17. And he goes on to say that these rites were accompanied by such things as frenzied dances, cult prostitution, both male and female, and at times, even by human sacrifice. And then it goes on to say, Israel's attraction to the debased fertility rites and adulterous worship practices, as well as the loathsome lifestyle of Canaan, was to be a long one, despite repeated divine warnings and chastisements. So Israel, the chosen people of God, were actually actively involving themselves in satanic rituals, including human blood sacrifice, including killing their own children. Why? Because it made their crops grow better. As Steve read in Jeremiah chapter 19, it was like, we went to the Teledoth. What was the word again, Steve?
Tophet.
The Tophet. Because, and that's where you would burn your kids up. And when Rod read Jeremiah chapter 7, the complaint was, we had better food when we were worshiping the pagan gods, so since we get a better variety of food, we're going to worship the fertility sky goddess and her fire god husband by burning our children in the Tophet so we can get better crops and have a broader variety of food. That is absolute. That just shows you the harshness, of the wickedness of the nation Israel. And the God of the Old Testament gets a bad reputation of being this harsh and judgmental thing. We talked about how the Ark of the Covenant was almost falling over, and one of the soldiers in Israel's service who wasn't a Jew reached out to grab it to prevent it from hitting the ground out of respect, and God had to strike him dead because he was a Gentile. And you think, man, this God, he's evil and cruel. No, he's righteous and pure, and he can't allow something unclean. Surely that man went directly into Abraham's bosom and is in heaven now waiting for the rapture so he can get his new body. But what we see then is Israel was trying the patience of God by burning their children in these Tophets. And I would tie that into an argument that's made by the Jehovah's Witnesses that, and this is unrelated, but this is a doctrinal point for all of you. After I'm martyred for the faith, any day now, you'll be able to take this message on. And another talking point is the reality of hell. We just did a teaching on South Beach last Saturday, which is also on our YouTube page as well, on the reality of hell. Jehovah's Witnesses say, and they explain when you approach them with the lake of fire, and what God says, the lake of fire is a real place of torment. And they explained to me, they said, oh no, well, you'll be thrown there, but poof, you disappear. Like if you took a tissue paper and threw it into a fireplace, it would just incinerate, poof, and be gone. And I said, that's not what Scripture points out. So what Steve points out is, if we had time to look at Judges, and we could see that the place in Jerusalem where these blood sacrifices to Chemosh and to Moloch were being conducted was in what's called in Hebrew the Valley of Hinnom. But in Greek, that Valley of Hinnom is pronounced Gehenna. Gehenna is what Jesus made reference to repeatedly in the New Testament as a place where you're going to go if you die without being born again. So the Jehovah's Witnesses, when they try to explain to you, like, no, the lake of fire is the place where you're thrown and you disappear. No. And they'll use the Gehenna argument. They'll say, well, Gehenna was it was a sort of a junkyard where you burnt trash. And Jesus used that because that's where you're burnt up. Actually, if you go back and see what the Old Testament corollary to that is, the reason why Jesus used the term Gehenna, it was a real place, a real valley where garbage was burned and dead animals were burned, and sometimes bodies of homeless people were burned as well. But the reason why he used Gehenna, it was because he knew the Jewish audience that he was speaking to understood that Gehenna was the same thing as Hinnom in the Old Testament, because that's the only scripture they had. They didn't have the Gospels, they didn't have the book of Revelation, they only had the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, Hinnom, or Gehenna, was the place that Israel got in trouble for taking their kids to set them on fire, to burn them while they screamed, terribly, to appease the fire god Chemosh, or the fire god Molech. And so, in their minds, when you mention the word Gehenna, it's the same as if I would approach a Jewish person down on South Beach now, an older one who understands. When I say Holocaust, or I say Auschwitz, or Buchenwald, or mention any one of the concentration camps from World War II, a Jewish person is going to immediately think, a place of suffering, torment, and being burnt in ovens. Jesus used Gehenna as a word that would trigger a memory. That's where people go to be tortured by being burnt in flames, and their screams are so loud that they had to play bands to cover up the sound, and then they had to burn incense to cover up the smell of their burning flesh. So it was supposed to be a place of torment. So when you run into your Jehovah's Witness friends, now you know a little bit of background about Gehenna and Tophet, and what Israel was actually doing as part of the Mystery Babylon system was burning their children to death to do that very thing. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and we'll move forward. We'll jump through that. I just want to read real quickly a brief passage from one of Dave Hunt's excellent books. This is another one of Dave Hunt's, one of my favorite Christian writers. He wrote a little bit about this Mystery Babylon system and how it worked its way from ancient Israel into the church, and eventually it made its way into the church by the Roman Empire. Supposedly when Constantine converted in 325 AD, he eventually signed the Edicts of Toleration, which made Christianity, instead of a capital crime where you would be thrown to the lions in the Colosseum, it became the official state religion of the Roman Empire. How could that have happened? And the reason why he did it was because Christianity was growing so popular. As more people were getting martyred, people saw that, hey, that's something worth dying for. Those people are going to their deaths happily, even children. Man, that's something better than all the riches in the world. And let's face it, people then are just like people today. We have empty lives apart from Christ. No matter how much money you have, no matter how much wealth you have, no matter how much prosperity you have, you still are looking for something inside, filling the empty spot with love. And if there's something that you believe that can give you that love, that is so great that you'd be willing to give up your physical life to obtain it, well, people wanted that, even in the Roman Empire. And so Christianity, real biblical born-again Christianity, began to spread throughout the Roman Empire and was affecting people even in the city of Rome, even in Caesar's own household, due to the efforts of the Apostle Paul, whose head got cut off for doing that very thing, converting Roman citizens to Christianity. So, 300 years later, Constantine, under the influence of his pagan Babylonian worship rites, which is what he did all his life, he, I believe, under the influence of Satan as well, supposedly had a dream, and he saw the plus sign, which was characterized as a cross. But that plus sign, you could take a look in Hislop's book, The Two Babylons, and we could see that that plus sign is actually an ancient Babylonian occultic symbol that has nothing to do with the Roman cross, which was basically a letter capital T or a letter small case t, cross being a structure in which you crucify people. So Constantine converts, and then what he does, signing the Edicts of Toleration, all those Christians in Rome, which were scheduled to be thrown to the Colosseum to be eaten by the lions, are no longer under a threat of death. So because they, they're forward thinking like, oh, this must be a miracle. This evil king who was working for Satan has now been converted. So they wanted to believe. And over time, they became corrupted by the wealth, and they got invited to, December 25th, they worship the god Saturn, which again is Satan in one of his costumes. You would engage in bacchanal, get drunk, and have an orgy, and have a feast, and you would celebrate every year Saturn. So what Constantine did is change the name from Saturnalia, which was the December, winter solstice celebration feast orgy, and and he called it Christ Mass, or the celebration of the birth of Jesus Christ. And out of the blue, out of nowhere came the birthday of Jesus as a holiday. That's not in the Bible anywhere. And so he got Christians to participate in pagan rituals. And if it was all on the government's dime, man, that made it all. You can get top shelf liquor, you can get all the best food. You know, Israel was burning their kids for better food selection. We saw that from Judges.
Epicure.
Yeah, well, exactly. You know, hey, toss your kid in the fire and we'll make you an Epicurean delight that you'll never forget. So that's exactly what happened. So Dave Hunt, in his book, Global Peace and the Rise of Antichrist, quotes Will Durant, one of the world's greatest historians. And he, you know, this passage Will Durant wrote about the effect of Rome converting supposedly to Christianity. So profound, I thought I would just take time to read it. So we have never had this in any one of our other teachings. So Dave Hunt's quoting Will Durant here. He says, when Christianity conquered Rome, the ecclesiastical structure of the pagan church, the title investments of the Pontifex Maximus, the worship of the Great Mother, and a multitude of comforting divinities, the sense of supersensible presences everywhere, the joy or solemnity of old festivals, and the pageantry of immemorial ceremony passed like maternal blood into the new religion, and captive Rome captured her conqueror. While Christianity converted the world converted Christianity. Wow, how sad and pathetic is that? When we were dying and under the threat of death every day, we were powerful, and we brought even the Roman Empire to its knees. And then when the Roman Empire got brought to its knees, it gave us wealth and prosperity and let us participate in its pagan rituals, and eventually Christianity got converted to paganism through the Mystery Babylon religious system. So, with all that, now we've got all of our background stuff out of the way, let's get back to Revelation chapter 17, and let's go ahead and, I think we'll go ahead, Albert, give you a chance to catch up. Start us out by taking a look at Revelation chapter 17, verses 1 and 2. Remember, this is now John, who has been raptured up into heaven after the 7 letters to the 7 churches from Jesus that were laid out for us in Revelation chapters 1, 2, and 3. We find that John goes up into heaven. He gets to see the 70th week of Daniel, which I have depicted here on my 70th week of Daniel timeline chart. John gets to, from this vantage point up here in heaven, he gets to see the 70th week of Daniel, this last 70 years of human history on the planet Earth. And we've seen already that we had the bowl judgments, and we had those bowl judgments started out by various terrible things. Let's take a look and see. We looked at this in Revelation chapter 16. We saw the 7 bowls were poured out. The Euphrates River was dried up, hail, and then we got to Babylon. And now Babylon is receiving her judgment after centuries and centuries, millennia even, of defying God. Tonight, Mystery Babylon, that started out in the Garden of Eden and grew up and became a big girl in ancient Babylon under Nimrod and Semiramis, finally meets her end here tonight. I call it, Antichrist marries Mystery Babylon, and together they birth the New World Order's one world government, where the God, Satan, the God of this world, is actually worshipped as God himself. And no longer is it necessary for Satan to dress in drag. He doesn't have any use for Mystery Babylon or for Semiramis or for the Queen of Heaven, and he dispatches her. And we're going to see now how the two come together. And they come together to do what? To unite the world together in a one-world religion that eventually convinces the people to accept the consort. The woman rides a beast, and that's the title of Dave Hunt's book. The woman riding the beast is the Mystery Babylon religious system, the Semiramis, goddess, Queen of Heaven motif or archetype is riding atop the beast, which is the kingdom of the Antichrist, headed by the Antichrist. He's not the king of the world yet. He needs the religious push. All those so-called Christians who aren't really born again, the Benny Hinn's, the pretzel dollars, the prosperity preachers, that are all going to be left behind after the rapture, they're going to be part of this new ecumenical move that I think probably will be headed by the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, uniting all Christianity together as one, and it'll be such a powerful coalition that even other religions will join in. And even now, the Pope is attempting to, and he has been doing this for years, to make inroads with the other major faiths like Buddhism and Islam and Hinduism, and even the syncretistic native religions, the Indian, pagan practices are syncretized into this as well. And they've had several meetings in Rome where they do that. We see this being played out here in Revelation 17, and so Antichrist needs this mystery Babylon, false pseudo-Christian one world religious system to unite all the people together who are shocked and terrified after this incredible event called the Rapture has removed 300 million people from around the globe, disappears overnight. And now this new one world religion brings comfort and succor to the people left behind. Antichrist will use this paradigm to gain the confidence of the people, and eventually they and his false prophet, who again I think will be the Pope, who will be the leader of this one world religion, and he'll say, this is fulfillment of Bible prophecy. This guy is the Messiah who was set forth to save us, and we should worship him. And eventually he will be worshipped as a God. So we pick it up then, Albert, if you would. Question, Albert?
No question.
Verses 1 and 2.
The doom of Babylon predicted.
Okay.
And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication.
There you go. And again, that term fornication means illicit sexual relations. It's not to suggest that, in Revelation 17, there's an actual girl who is, having sex with a bunch of different kings of the earth. What is being presented here is the concept that this mystery Babylon system has had illicit relations with the kings of nations for centuries, for millennia even. And the Roman Catholic Church has the Roman Catholic Church struck concordance with Adolf Hitler during World War II, had a concordat with Mussolini of Italy during World War II. Hey, if you guys win World War II, the Catholic Church gets to be the official church. We'll help you out, and we'll keep quiet about, the Nazi concentration camps, but we want to be the official state church of the Fourth Reich when it comes into power. And that's what the secret concordats were all about. And people say that they're buried in the basement of the Vatican, but they don't want to release it because that would be a public relations nightmare for them. But that's what really happened. And even before Adolf Hitler, you had the popes in Vatican City striking deals and bargains with the kings of France and Spain and England, and that's why they were all at war with one another. We could sit down and talk for hours about the intrigue just in the British Empire, how, Mary, Queen of Scots, you got a Catholic queen, and she kills everybody in England that's a Protestant, and then Bloody Mary, and Anne Boleyn marries, the King Edward VIII, I guess it is, of France, and a new Protestant queen comes to England, and there's wars, and the Pope is behind the scenes causing warfare amongst nations, and people die. As we pointed out last week, both Chuck Missler and Dave Hunt pointed out that, that more Christians, born-again evangelical Christians like the Waldenses and the Hussites, were killed by one pope in one afternoon than all of the Roman emperors during the Roman crusade against Christianity during the entire reign of the Roman Empire. So, yes, this woman is drunk with the blood of the saints, and she's fornicated with King's Albert by engaging in political intrigue. And so we see the Pope doing that even to this day. Doesn't he have, he invites presidents over and they come and they have to dress in a certain color and they kiss his ring, things of that nature. President Kennedy, by the way, who was, ironically enough, raised in a Roman Catholic, Irish Catholic family in Boston, was invited to come and meet with the Pope in June of 1963. And basically, the understanding is that he was supposed to pay obeisance to the Pope, and he refused to meet with him.
Oh my goodness.
And at about the same time, John Todd, who was a former, high-ranking bloodline Satanist cultist who became a born-again Christian. He tells the story of JFK actually coming down to Miami to work related to the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs disaster, and he was speaking at the Orange Bowl or whatever, and he ran into the mayor of Tampa at the time, was an evangelical Christian, and shared the gospel with him and took him to, some evangelical preacher in Ybor City, which is where a number of Cuban refugees were, and Kennedy was there to speak to them and encourage them, and he actually accepted Christ. And after that, he refused to meet with the Pope a week later, and 6 months later he was dead. And so the power of the Pope and the Catholic Church, maybe reaching even to influencing, the assassination of an American president, it just suggests to you that this is a powerful entity that is, throughout the centuries, caused death and destruction everywhere it went. And what is worse about it, they're not doing it in the name of Satan, they're doing it in the name of, the God of the Bible and Jesus Christ, because they're a Christian church. So, Albert, good job. Okay, so let's pick it up with verse 3 through 5, Steve.
So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and the abominations of the earth.
Wow. So, Steve, what colors was she wearing?
Scarlet and purple.
Scarlet and purple. What religious organization on the face of the planet Earth, in fact, the largest religious organization on the face of the planet Earth, has their official colors?
The Catholic Apostolic Roman Church.
There you go. Cardinals wear scarlet, and the bishops wear purple. These outstanding, these really colorful things. That is the official color of the Roman Catholic Church. So Dave Hunt again makes the excellent argument that we got another hint that Mystery Babylon of ancient Babylon that began way back long ago and far away, and we'll just take a look at our timeline chart again as we narrate that long ago and far away, Mystery Babylon starting in the Garden of Eden and moving to Nimrod and Semiramis here with the Tower of Babel right about here, and then moving its way through to ancient Israel and eventually working its way past the crucifixion of Jesus into the church era of now 2,000 years long. And so, again, Mystery Babylon has made a long journey and has ensconced itself right in the biggest Christian denomination on the face of the planet Earth and the most influential religious organization on earth, bar none. Even Islam, combined together with Hinduism, doesn't have the influence of the Catholic Church. And so we find out that the Holy Spirit is revealing to us the colors of this woman. Not that the Catholic Church created Mystery Babylon, but that is where it is presently residing, just like it formerly resided on the plain of Shinar in the Tower of Babel. Now it's residing in Vatican City in Rome as its own nation state. So Jenny, if you want to read verse 6, or Rod, whichever one of the two you guys. So we're reading chapter 17 and verse 6. Rod, you got it? Get it to us, Rod.
And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints,
Keep that voice up so everybody can hear you.
and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered, what great admiration. And the angel said unto me, wherefore
Hold on.
this...
Okay, let me roll back. Okay, so
Verse
he
6.
said, I saw a woman drunken with the blood of the saints. And so again, Dave Hunt points out, what church organization has killed more Christians than any other? The Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church killed more Christians in a day than the Roman Empire killed during the entire reign of all the Caesars.
And she will continue throughout the tribulation?
No, she's going to meet her end at the end of the halfway point of the tribulation. And that's a good question, Albert. We're going to look at that in just a second. As a matter of fact, we'll throw up our Daniel 70 weeks of Daniel timeline chart. It is my contention that she's going to reign right up here to the midway point. Here we are. Here's our entire 70th week. She's going to reign right up here to the midway point, at which point Satan no longer needs her, and God's going to put it in Satan's heart to destroy her. And we're going to see that
The
coming
Catholic
up.
Church.
Yeah. Well, and Catholic Church, which will now be expanded out into a one-world pseudo-Christian cult headed by the Pope, but including all forms of Christianity and all forms of Eastern mysticism and all forms of syncretistic paganism in the New Age, all united together under the umbrella of the Roman Catholic Church, but including all types of mystery worship systems. And so, again, we saw that this woman is drunk with the blood of the martyrs. And so John is saying in verse 6, and I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. Now again, that word in the English King James Version actually should be, is better translated, amazement or astonishment. Like, holy crap. Why is he astounded? Because not only is this woman drinking the blood of the saints of Jesus, but she's supposedly the mother of Jesus who's doing it. So he knows that this is counterfeit Christianity, but it's almost as if John is saying, and Chuck Missler, I give him credit for that insight. He's saying, it's almost as if John was saying, like, if it was a bunch of Satanists doing it, it would be okay. They're the enemy. They killed Paul. He knew Paul had his head cut off. He knew Peter had been crucified already. This is 96 AD. All of his friends, every one of the apostles was already dead. They'd all been martyred, but they got martyred by the enemies of God.
Nothing to see here. You expect that.
Roman government and enemies of God in the temple system, but to have Christians and the so-called mother of Christ be the one killing all these saints and then getting intoxicated, not engaged in a war. It was my life or your life, and I had kids at home, so it was your life. But I feel bad about it. No, she was intoxicated with pleasure from killing all of the martyrs and prophets of Jesus. And so John's like, what is this? What are you showing me here? How upside down is the world going to be during this last 7-year period of time before Jesus comes back? And so he's astounded. So now, Albert, we get to the complicated part. This is, again, the toughest set of verses in all the Bible to teach, but I think I've broken it down. Mark Hitchcock has done a good job of breaking stuff out, and Dave Hunt and some other people. So read for us verses 7 and 8, Albert.
And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman, and of the beast that carried her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is.
Okay, so we see a beast, and it's got 7 heads.
Yeah.
And how many horns does it have?
10 horns.
It's got 10 horns, and it says that it is not, it ascends out of the abyss, or the bottomless pit, and goes into perdition. So it was, it is not, and it is. What does that all mean? Well, there's a number of different arguments that would suggest that it means that, is it a kingdom? Would suggest to you that it is, that existed, that fell, and came back again. So I prepared my trusty dusty,
Well, you mentioned the 7 mountains around Rome.
Okay, and so that's a good point, Albert. And so we see that that is another one of the reasons Dave Hunt, in his excellent book, A Woman Rides the Beast, and in Alexander Hislop's book, The Two Babylons, that he says it has to be Rome, the Roman Catholic Church, that's being spoken about here, because Rome is a city built on, guess what? It's built on hills, and not just any amount of hills, but 7 hills. And so the 7 hills of Rome, including the Palatine, Capitoline, and I forget the others, but Rome is a city built on 7 hills, or 7 mountains. And so again, I think that's one of my favorite words, Albert, and I know you can guess what it is. It's a double
Edendra.
entendre, meaning it has more than one literal meaning.
Right.
So what the Holy Spirit is telling us is, yes, In the last days, Mystery Babylon is ensconced, camped out at Vatican City in the Roman Catholic Church. It's a fraudulent organization. But it's also telling us the nature of the kingdom of the Antichrist. And that's why I say, in the little notice I sent out today and put on Facebook, Antichrist marries the woman that rides the beast. And together, they give birth to the New World Order, ruled over by Satan himself. And so, yeah, the 7 hills of Rome are in view here. But it also can be that, hills or mountains can also be authorities or figures of power. And so, again, as Albert pointed out, greatly he said he saw a beast that carried her, which had 7 heads and 10 horns. So here we're talking about 7 heads. Later we're going to see that the 7 heads are 7 mountains. In fact, we see in verse 9 that very thing. So since you did a good job of that, Albert, read for us verse 9 through 10, and we'll see that the 7 heads, not only are they 7 different kings or kingdoms, but they're also 7 hills upon which the woman sits. Verses 9 and 10, Albert.
And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth.
Okay.
And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space, whatever that means.
What does it mean, Albert? What do you think? I mean, that could just...
I'm perplexed.
Exactly. This is a perplexing turn of a phrase, and we've had theologians and Bible scholars for decades and even centuries debating what does all of this mean. So Albert says, here's the mind which hath wisdom. You need the wisdom of Solomon to understand this stuff. The 7 heads are 7 mountains, and when I speak of the wisdom of Solomon, doing my studies on Chemosh and Moloch and all this, it's so sad. King Solomon, the wisest man of all time, God gave him the wisdom the same way he gave strength to Samson. And he took that wisdom and he married all of these pagan girls, and God said, "Don't do it, Solomon." And God gave Solomon, by the way, this is again a parenthetical aside, he gave him permission. In the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 2, 1 man, 1 wife. Adam had 1 wife, and that was it. That's how God wants it. But he said, okay, I'm going to make the exception for you, Solomon, as I think a morality shall with the rest of those males. Solomon had 700 wives and 300 lovers. Concubines means girls he could have sex with without being married to them. So that means King Solomon had 1,000 beautiful babes to choose to have sex with. And because God gave him permission, even though he recommended that he not do it, he wasn't committing adultery or fornication, so he wasn't under the condemnation of God. So he had 1,000 women and children, and God said, don't do it, Solomon, because what's going to happen is those beautiful girls are from other... I got a nice Jewish girl for you. Why don't you marry her? She's her dad raised her up to believe in me. No, Solomon wanted to marry these, and to interact with these, beautiful women from surrounding nations, and eventually the Bible says these women led his heart away from the Lord. And eventually Solomon became the greatest wizard, sorcerer, witch in the history of occultism. If you look at the occultists, they'll talk about Manly Hall, or they'll talk about Aleister Crowley, and maybe they'll talk about, this guy Gardner, and, different people have written books and created different systems. Who's some others, Steve? In California, you had the guy that was in the military. Remember that guy?
Von Braun?
No, not that guy. But the point is, if you ask them who was the greatest wizard, sorcerer, witch of all times, all of them will say, hands down, King Solomon. King Solomon from the Bible. He's the guy that created what we mistakenly call the Star of David. The hexagram is actually the Star of King Solomon. Solomon created it as a dimensional portal. He knew sacred geometry and mathematics, and he understood particle and theoretical physics, and how energy and ley lines work, and how you can use geometric symbols to open up portals that can release the fallen angels from their imprisonment in the second heaven that they've been cast down into. So that's an aside. So King Solomon, as wise as he was, made a bad decision based upon going after the beauty of a woman.
Yeah.
Beauty of women, just Samson, the fallen angels that married and created the Nephilim. Pretty girls drive everybody crazy, man. So God, I've got to sit down and talk to him when I get to heaven. Was it a good idea, though? Wasn't it a good idea? I mean, there's a whole lot of heartache that was caused because the craziness that men and angels will do to obtain the favor of a beautiful girl with long hair, as we see Jenny sitting here. It's not your fault, Jenny. You didn't ask me for one with beautiful long hair. The angels are looking down at you, though, so be careful. So anyway, okay, so what we see then, it says, you got to have wisdom of Solomon to understand this. Here's the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth, and there are 7 kings. Now here's a riddle for you. Man, this is like a riddle for what was Hercules had to answer those riddles, and then Samson, in the Old Testament had something sweet to eat, and it was like, it's a lion and honey inside, whatever. And this is one of those things. It says 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue for a short space. And you're sitting there thinking like, what in the world does that mean? So now, Steve, verse 11, what does it say?
And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition.
Now that, I would nominate Revelation chapter 17, verse 11, as the most obscure verse in the whole Bible. What on earth could that possibly? What was the Holy Spirit thinking when he wrote that? And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition. Oh, well, now that you explained that, thank you. But we're going to break all that down, and we're going to explain all of that. So, okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at my little breakdown chart here, my Book of Revelation chapter 17 / Book of Daniel chart. And basically, you got 2 schools of thought. You got, Mark Hitchcock, John Walver, Chuck Missler, have laid out what I think, and I've drawn it out in 3 different ways. This diagram, and this diagram are basically the same. You have Adrian Rogers, who is late. He's deceased. He was a pastor and a writer. We read an excerpt from his book, I think last week. He says of Revelation chapter 10 that the reference here to 7 kings, 5 of which are fallen, are all Roman Caesars. And some of the preterists, and for those of you that don't know what preterism is the concept that all of the book of Revelation actually happened before 70 AD. And that, book of Revelation was fulfilled centuries ago. Preterism is wrong, and they adopt this argument as well. And they'll say that the 7 kings are as follows. Augustus Caesar, Claudius, Caligula, Tiberius, and Nero. These were kings of Rome, or the Caesars, that had already died as of 96 AD. But I checked the list, and there was a guy before Augustus, right? There was Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was really the first of the Roman Caesars. But some people, well, he was, it was still a republic, and then he was a senator, and then he didn't become the emperor till the end, so we're not going to count him. So it makes their math work if they don't count Julius Caesar. But Julius Caesar is the most famous, I would argue, of all of the Roman Caesars. So if you don't count him, then these 5 will work for the preterists. Augustus, Claudius, Caligula, Tiberius, and Nero were already dead by the time John wrote the book of Revelation in 96 AD. And then we get to verse 6 of Revelation, verse 10 of Revelation 17 that says, 1 is the one that is existent or extant at the time John is writing Revelation in 96 AD as Domitian. And then they say that the 7th is the one that has not yet come, the Antichrist, and that the 8th is of the 7. I agree with that part. I just don't agree with the 1 through 5 being 5 Roman Caesars. The one that I think is more persuasive is the argument submitted by Mark Hitchcock, John Walver, Chuck Missler. I agree with this one. It would suggest that when you're reading Revelation 9 through 11, Revelation 17 verses 9 to 11, those verses are making reference to what? 7 kingdoms and then an 8th final one world kingdom. So 1 would be Egypt, the kings would be the pharaohs. 2, Assyria, ruled over by the Assyrian kings, a number of Assyrian kings. 3, Neo-Babylon, the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar. That was the head of gold. Chuck Missler breaks it down and gives us Daniel's 4 plus 1. We'll look at that in a second. 4, Medo-Persia, ruled over by Cyrus the Great, Darius the Mede, and Etsequentia. 5, Greece of Alexander the Great, and 6 being the Roman Empire of the Caesars. And then, after a break in the church era comes along, Rome is revived again, and we see verses in Daniel that would suggest that that's the case. And we're going to look at those in a few minutes. And so, the 7th kingdom will be a revised version of the 6th kingdom, the Roman kingdom of the Caesars, becomes the revived Roman empire that's ruled over by 10 kings. And that's where we get our number 10 from. And remember, we saw elsewhere in the book of Daniel, and Daniel and Revelation really are Old Testament, New Testament corollaries to one another. They should be read together, and they're married together. 10 kings. Remember, we found out that 3 of the kings rebelled against Antichrist, and he had to destroy 3 of them, so only 7 were left. But the 10 kings originally were the 10 regional governors of the one world government that was really established by the Antichrist. And so, revived Roman Empire, ruled over by 10 regional kings, is the 7th, and then finally the Antichrist, breaks off the horns of 3 of the 10 kings, leaving the other 7 kings who, again, in an assassination attempt, I believe, that's successful, but when Satan causes him to come back to life, the 7 kings say, oh man, who can make war against the beast? All right, we'll sign up for you then. And so the final 8th one world government and one world leader is the Antichrist government himself. So again, Chuck Missler breaks it down slightly differently. He calls it Daniel's 4 plus 1. And let's get Steve, if you would, flip over to Daniel chapter 2, verses 28 through 49. Get ready to read that for me. So again, 7 kings. Those 7 kings or kingdoms are a result of the kingdoms that came before the Babylonian empire of Nebuchadnezzar. So we have the Egyptian kings, the Assyrian kingdom, and then we have the Babylonian kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. That's Neo-Babylon, not to be confused with ancient Babylon of Nimrod. And then you have Persia, Greece, Rome 1, and then Rome 2. And all of that comes from and correlates to, and this is why John Walbert, who was the head of the Dallas Theological Seminary, says he agrees with this computation of the horns and the heads. He says, because it agrees with Daniel. In the book of Daniel, which we're going to find out from Steve, gives us what Chuck Missler refers to as his Daniel's 4 plus 1. And so...
And that's the map right there.
Yeah, and so I'm going to break it out, and what Steve is about, see, it's not high tech, it's low tech, but
That's chapter 2 of Daniel.
it's practical low tech. So read for us, if you would, Daniel chapter 2, Steve, and give us verses 28 through 49. And I'm going to narrate right here on the screen as Steve reads along. I'm going to narrate, sort of almost like a karaoke thing. In Daniel 4 plus 1, to give you some background, King Nebuchadnezzar is the king of Neo-Babylon. Israel has been deported because of the repeated abominations. They wouldn't give the land its 7th year rest for 70 years. They were doing all kinds of terrible things. God had them taken into captivity in Babylon. Daniel was one of the young Jewish boys that got taken into captivity, and Daniel had an understanding of things related to the stars, and God gave him knowledge about things. So Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he couldn't remember what the dream was. You guys ever have that? Like if you wake up and you don't think about it immediately, you'll have this like, man, what's that? I had a great dream last night. Doggone, I can't. What was it? And it bugs you because it was such a profound dream, and you want it. If you don't think about it, as soon as you wake up. And if you think about it as soon as you wake, it's vivid. It's almost like you're replaying the video. Like, oh yeah, and then we did that. Yeah, but if you wait, you answer the phone, check some text, and you'll forget it. You can't get it. King Nebuchadnezzar had that happen to him, and he was like, I can't remember. So he went to his soothsayers, the guys who eventually became the Magi and all that looked at the stars.
Fortune tellers.
Well, some people would argue
That's what it
that
means.
they're actually astronomers that had an advanced understanding of the stars, and they were the ones under what now became the Persian Empire that were able to predict the appearance of a star that predicted the birth of the Messiah in the land of Israel. So they sent the wise men to the land of Israel because they saw the sign of his star in the east. We were in the east and we saw your star in the west, and we knew based upon the writings of Daniel who believed in your prophet that a Messiah was coming. That's why they came and they were able to give presents to Jesus. They were actually corollaries of a group of astronomers who Daniel actually had initiated when he was in captivity in Babylon. So Nebuchadnezzar goes to his advisors, his astrologers and astronomers, and says, yeah guys, I had a dream and I want you to tell me what it was, because I want to know what it means. And he said, all right, tell us what the dream was and we'll interpret it for you. He says, I can't remember the dream. So you either tell me what the dream was and then interpret it, or I'm going to cut your heads off and kill you because you guys are a bunch of frauds. If you really have all these magical powers, you can tell me what the dream was. And they were like, well, wait a minute, because anybody, you can tell me, I had a dream about a red car and a spider. Okay, spiders in a dream with a red car means that you're going to inherit a lot of money soon, and you're going to get married. So he was, no. You tell me what the dream was, and then you can interpret it. They couldn't do it, so he's going to kill them all the next day. So they said, hey, that guy, Daniel, that Jewish kid, man, the Lord is with him. Let's take a flying leap and see what he says. And Daniel, of course, came through. And God, he said, there's a God in heaven that can interpret dreams. And God did that very thing. And the dream that he revealed was, in fact, this. The dream of the metallic man, which was God's revealing to King Nebuchadnezzar the four major empires of the world in God's eyes. The head of gold being Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian Empire, and then four others relating to the Antichrist. So, again, in the book of Revelation, we're taking that dream of Nebuchadnezzar and we're adding Assyria and Egypt to it and tying it all together as seven major kingdoms throughout history. But Steve, go ahead and read that for us.
But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and thy vision upon thy head, upon thy bed, are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. And he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, his breasts and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. That thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon its feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone smote the image, became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. We will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings. For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the owls and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand.
Stop right there. So what Steve is saying, he said, thou, O king, are the head of gold. So he's basically saying, King Nebuchadnezzar, the top of the statue, the chief dude in charge, the head of the statue made of gold. Gold is more valuable than silver. Silver is more valuable than bronze. Bronze is more valuable than iron. So each successive kingdom becomes less glorious and less powerful. Nebuchadnezzar, you got the greatest kingdom that's ever going to be anymore until the very end. And so now he's describing it to him. So pick it up from there, Steve.
And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh into pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas
stop you right there. So the head of gold, we already know. He says, "Thou, O king, art the head of gold." The head of gold is the Babylonian Empire that you're in charge of. But then there's going to come another kingdom that's inferior to you. It's silver. It's still valuable, it's powerful, glorious, but not quite as glorious as gold is. That's going to be what? The Medo-Persian Empire that eventually takes over from Babylon at the end of the reign of, what was it? Not Nebuchadnezzar, but
Belshazzar,
saw their handwriting on the wall. Your kingdom is over and completed. And the Persians came in under the city wall that night and took over. So the Persian Empire is the chest of silver. And then you have the hips of brass. That's making reference to the Grecian Empire of Alexander the Great, who came in swiftly and took over from the Persians and conquered it, super fast. And that's why they called him, they characterized him as a leopard. And then we have another kingdom that is made up of iron and has two legs. The statue has two legs. It's the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is made up of iron. Rome was a harsh and fierce kingdom. But remember, it divided into two different regions, east and west. The Western kingdom was set up in the city of Rome, right? And then eventually, Emperor Constantine wanted to get involved in Eastern mysticism because he was really an occultist at heart. So he wanted to move eastward. So he changed his capital from the city of Rome, where it always had been, and moved it eastward to the city of Byzantium in Turkey, and renamed it the city of Constantine, which is today called Constantinople, which means literally
the religious capital of Turkey.
Right, which is this, which proves that he was always an occultist. He was never a Christian. So the Roman Empire divided into east and west, right? The Western government was set up at Rome, and the Eastern government was set up in Constantinople or Byzantium, Turkey. And so that is a prediction that Daniel is receiving 500 years before Jesus. This didn't happen until long after Jesus was crucified. And so now, Steve is going to be describing to us this other kingdom. You got 1, 2, 3, 4. Chuck Missler calls this Daniel's 4 plus 1. Kingdom 1, head of gold, Babylon. Kingdom 2, chest of silver, Persia. Kingdom 3, the hips of brass, the Grecian Empire of Alexander the Great. Kingdom 4, the Roman Empire, which divided into east and west, two different legs, the western and eastern branch, and eventually when the Catholic Church came along after that, it divided out into the eastern branch of Orthodoxy. Eastern Orthodoxy gave you Russian Orthodox and Greek Orthodox, and the western branch, which gave you Roman Catholicism, based in the Vatican City in Rome. But then there's this other entity, not a fifth, but he calls it plus 1, because it's really the Roman Empire recreated again. So it's not a fifth entity because it's not different. It's the fourth one reproduced again. That's why Chuck Missler calls it the 4 plus 1. So Steve, read us.
And that's in Revelations.
That's actually in Daniel chapter 2.
Verse 41 now.
Okay, so.
And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And
that word that Steve used, miry clay, when you look at the actual Hebrew etymology behind that, it can also be translated earthly clay, and it can also be translated, it's suggested by many that this is making reference to something that's of the earth being combined together with something that's not of the earth, meaning earthlings with human DNA being combined together with non-earthlings that have non-human DNA. Steve?
And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and worshipped Daniel, and commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret.
Okay, so what we have then is basically Daniel is revealing, and let's go back to verse 42 of this metallic man, the feet of this creation. The legs are clearly the Roman Empire, but the feet are a revised empire that comes from out of the legs. The Roman Empire is revived, and it says, Whereas thou sawest that the feet and toes were part of potter's clay and part of iron, and Adam was made from clay, by the way, the kingdom shall be divided, and there shall be in it strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay. But then it goes on to say, it says, Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another. So now we've got a total transition to something completely different. It's using the personal pronoun they shall mingle themselves, meaning these are persons, but they're going to mingle themselves with the seed or the DNA, the genetic material of men, which means that these they have to be persons who are non-humans. So we're talking about the return of the Nephilim. Fallen angels will make up the kingdom of the Antichrist. And it says, that for as much as thou sawest that a mountain, cut out of, the stone cut out of the mountain without hands. That's a reference to Jesus. But what we're talking about here is the kingdom of the Antichrist will be made up, I would submit to you guys, of human beings and fallen angels. If you look at the 200 million person army that's made up of monstrosities that we looked at in Revelation chapter 16 and Revelation chapter 9, we saw these crazy looking beasts coming out of the Abuso as part of Antichrist's army. I think that what we are learning from Daniel there is that the kingdom of the Antichrist, the 4+1, again, Egypt, Assyria, and then the four kingdoms that Daniel talked about in Daniel chapter 2, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome 1, and then the revived Roman Empire, and we get that from Daniel chapter 9. Steve, flip over to Daniel chapter 9 and read verses 24 through 27 for us. But let me explain this first. The revived Roman Empire will, according to Daniel chapter 2, contain people that are human and also people that are not human. And they won't cling to one another. And there's going to be conflict. Again, the mark of the beast that we learned about in Revelation 13 changes your DNA to make you into a Superman. And if you don't take the mark, you can't be part of the Antichrist one world government. You can't turn into a Superman, a Nephilim. Nimrod became the great king of ancient antiquity by doing what? By ritualistically perverting and changing his DNA to make himself into a Superman. What Daniel is predicting here is that the kingdom of the Antichrist will fall because there will be humans mixed together with non-humans, and they won't cling to one another. There's going to be warfare and animosity between those two groups. And so, again, Daniel chapter 9 is where we get the depiction of the revived Roman Empire being what's pointed out here. So read for us Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 through 27, Steve.
70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, unto the Messiah. Good to hear her. The prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks.
Or 69 weeks of years.
The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood.
Okay, so stop right there. The people of the prince that shall come. So, who destroyed the temple? The Romans destroyed the temple in 70 AD. 70 AD.
Yes.
Titus Vespasian, the Roman Empire, destroyed the temple. So now we know, because of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, that the people who destroyed the temple will be the people from which the prince will come. Which prince? The prince who will rule over the world in the last days, the Antichrist, the prince of darkness. That's where that phrase comes from Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. The people of the prince who shall come will destroy the temple, is a backwards way of saying the same people who destroyed the temple in 70 AD will be the same people that the Antichrist, the prince of darkness, comes from. And that's what we learned from Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. So, Steve, that was very helpful that you did that. Now we can go back up to our explanation chart there. And so, now we see that, yes, Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 says that Rome has to be the seventh kingdom because they are the people that destroyed the temple of God in 70 AD. And so, Antichrist has to be a part of the revived Roman Empire. But he doesn't have to be Roman necessarily. There's an argument that we'll look at next week that suggests that the Antichrist is an Assyrian and not necessarily a Roman, but Rome was expanded around the world. So Rome included a lot of different areas. So again, here's our 4 plus 1. So you have Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then the revived Roman Empire. Chuck Missler's 4 plus 1. And that's what I think is pointed out here. Now we're going to look at Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. And let's see, Rod, if you could, read for us Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 7, because that gave the head of Dallas Theological Seminary, John Walbert, who's also deceased. All the great Bible prophecy teachers have passed on. But I got a chance to meet almost all of these guys. Chuck Missler, John Walbert, Dave Hunt.
Tony Evans?
Tony Evans, in my mind, isn't a great Bible prophecy teacher, and he's not dead. So either way. All right, so, okay, so what John Walbert says is that the interpretation that I've adopted, Mark Hitchcock, John Walbert, Chuck Missler all adopt, that the 7 kings are the 7 kingdoms, not 7, Roman emperors, but 7 world kingdoms, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome 1, and revived Rome. He says that matches best with Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. And so we're going to have that read by Rod right now.
In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven strove upon the great sea. And 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man. And a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side. And it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I behold, and lo, and another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns.
Okay, so what John Walbert says is that, hey, Daniel got a dream shortly after Nebuchadnezzar did of these same world empires, but because he saw them the way God sees them, he saw them as wild beasts.
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar, who hadn't gotten born again yet, was a secular guy, so he saw them as, four glorious kingdoms, and then this other kingdom that came from out of the fourth glorious kingdom. Daniel seeing them as God sees them. And the first empire he sees is the Babylonian Empire, which he sees as a winged lion, and the Persian Empire he sees as a bear, and then the hips of brass, the Grecian Empire, he sees as a four-headed leopard. And it's a leopard, and this is, again, if you look at the detail of Daniel's description of these four empires, people have said throughout history that this has to be a fraud. Daniel could not have written these things in 500 BC, long before they happened, because the detail and the description of these kings is so detailed that it has to have been written after the fact, which proves that the Bible is a supernatural book of prophecy. So here is Daniel in Babylon during the head of gold time. So he's seeing down the corridor of time, centuries later, he sees King Alexander the Great, who conquered nations so quickly they described him as moving like a leopard.
Wow.
And and Daniel, of course, his dream, he sees a leopard that has wings that's faster than anybody. But this leopard isn't like any other leopard, it's a four-headed leopard. Why does it have four heads? Because we're going to find out that when, Alexander the Great conquered all these kingdoms, he died at a young age. In fact, he died in the city of Babylon. And as he was laying in his bed in Babylon, many centuries later, he said, who gets the kingdom of Greece now that you're dying? He says, give it to the strong. And he said, divide it out amongst my four generals. And so the Grecian Empire of Alexander the Great was divided out into four generals of Alexander the Great. Now, how did Daniel know that? How could he have written that down? God had to tell him. Supernatural book. So the last of these beasts that Daniel sees in his dream is a beast diverse from all of the other beasts. And, Steve described to us that, man, it's got like, a strange number of heads. And so go ahead and read that for us again, Steve. Verse 8, chapter 7.
8 of 7? I consider the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were...
You start for 7 and run all the way down.
I'm sorry, 7. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things.
Okay, so what Daniel is seeing here is the Roman Empire that started in 63 BC, and he's seeing the revival of that Roman Empire. So he's seeing those two together.
700 years earlier.
Right, there you go. And so he's seeing Daniel's 4 plus 1, and he's seeing the fourth and the plus 1 together. So he says in, verse 7, he says, the fourth beast was dreadful and terrible and exceeding strong. That's the Roman Empire, the legs of iron, as King Nebuchadnezzar saw it. But then he goes on and says, this beast was different from all the other beasts before it, and it had, guess what? 10 horns. Horns, again, are leaders or kings. Remember the 10 regional governors we read about in Revelation chapter 17? The one world government of Antichrist will be divided out into 10 regions with 10 different kings. But we find out verse 8, while I was considering the horns, there appeared amongst them another horn and little one coming up amongst them, before whom the first 3 horns were plucked out by the roots. This is the description that most Bible prophecy scholars tells us, that the 10 horns that we see in Revelation chapter 17 will eventually be reduced by 3. Why? Because they're going to rebel against the authority of the Antichrist. And they are not going to agree that he should rule the world. And I believe one of these 3 regional governors will assassinate the Antichrist and kill him. And he will be dead. and Satan will be allowed by God to resurrect him back to life again. And when he comes
Wow.
back to life, what does he do, Albert? He tears the horns out and plucks them out by the root. He kills the 3 nation states or regional international areas that rebelled against him. And when he does that, the other 7 say, who is like unto the beast and who's able to make war with him? We read about that in Revelation. And they bow down and worship him and say, guess what? You're the God. So we see now then that this 7-headed beast, this terrible beast with 1 head, which is Rome, and the 4 lepers, we see that eventually, according to what we're reading here in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, is that Antichrist will destroy all opposition by killing off the 3 regional governors who had assassinated him. When he comes back from the dead, the other 7 kings will swear allegiance to him, and now we will have the one world government that Satan has always wanted. What he planned to do with Nimrod and the Tower of Babel, he will finally have accomplished. And guess what? Once he does that, guess who he doesn't need anymore? He doesn't need his harlot wife.
Yeah.
He doesn't need Mystery Babylon, the woman that rides the beast, to get up and hey, I got the 7 kings bowing down and worshiping me. I killed off the other guys. I came back from the dead. Satan is indwelling inside of me. So we see that Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 7, again, the leopard has 4 heads. Alexander's kingdom was divided up to his 4 generals, Lysimachus, Cassander, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Ptolemy got Egypt, Seleucus got Judea and Syria, Cassander got North Africa, and Lysimachus got everything else. And so there's no way that Daniel could have guessed that there's going to be a king coming in a couple hundred years, and he's going to take over the whole world faster than anybody ever has. And then he's going to die at an early age right here in the city of Babylon, and he's going to give his kingdom to his 4 generals. So that's why this leopard has, instead of 1 head, 4 heads. So again, you get the magic number 7, which is the number of completion in the Bible. The lion, bear, leopard, and the terrible beast, that's 4 heads. But you see that lion, bear, leopard, that has 4 heads. So of those first 3, you got a total of 7 heads, and then you got an additional head that comes from the Antichrist. So 4 beasts with a total of 7 heads. That description fits best the model that the 8 kings and kingdoms that we see in Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 to 11, again, will be the great world empires. We'll look at it one last time. Chuck Missler again breaks it down nicely for us. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, which is the first of his 4+1, Persia, the second of his 4+1, Greece, the third of his 4+1, and then then the 6th one, it says, one is, at the time that John is writing this down in 96 AD, the one kingdom or empire that's in existence is the Roman Empire. So 1 is, that's Rome 1, and then we get down to the next verse. It says, and the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must continue for a short space. That's the +1. That's the revived Roman Empire. The one that is, at the time John in 96 AD is writing the book of Revelation, is the Roman Empire. Domitian was the emperor at the time. But then, another will come after that, and that will be the Antichrist who will revive the Roman Empire. And when he comes, he must continue for a short space. So that describes for us, I think, best how to look at Revelation chapter 17, verses 9 to 11, those strange permutations related to all of that. So thanks for helping out with that. Read for us verse 11 for us, Albert, just to lay it out, and we'll see. Or Rod, did we get to you yet?
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Albert, read for me verse 11.
And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition.
Okay, and so so the last one is the Antichrist. He is of the 7, he is the 8th, and he goeth into perdition. Now some people have said that, of these kingdoms, the only one that isn't represented today we have Egypt in North Africa. We've got Babylon is Iraq now. Persia is what? Iran. Greece is Greece. Rome is Rome. The only one of these 7 great kingdoms that doesn't exist is Assyria. That doesn't exist anymore. They had Sennacherib, and who are some of the other great kings? Sennacherib was
the
one.
Ninevites, right?
The Ninevites and...
Herb, let me ask you, in all your years of studying this stuff, who was like one of the first people to decipher all this?
Oh, well, John in the book of Revelation was released from the island of Patmos where he was supposed to die because God wanted him to go back into the churches that were then in existence and teach them the book of Revelation. So John is the first guy that taught it. And then John had as his right-hand man a couple of guys who became, the church fathers.
Irenaeus.
Polycarp.
Polycarp
was one of his disciples. And it got spread down word of mouth. And so John was the guy who came off the island of Patmos when he was supernaturally released. So again, we see that the only one of these kingdoms that isn't extant now is the Assyrian Empire. And so
extant, good word.
Right? Okay, which means in existence right now. So there are some people, Joe Chambers amongst them, that have suggested that the Antichrist may be, ethnically speaking, from the region of Assyria. And even though he's part of the revived Roman Empire, he doesn't have to necessarily ethnically be a Roman citizen or something like that, or Italian. So that's just an argument, but the other has not yet come. So we laid that out, and that, I think, is the best explanation. Let's take a look, if we could. Albert, since you got your book, flip over to Revelation chapter 13 and read verses 1 through 4. That kind of relates to the verse you just read from Revelation 17:11.
The first beast, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered about the beast.
After the beast.
And they worshipped after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?
Okay, so what Albert just read to us in his best dramatic Scorpiesque voice.
Scorpiesque voice. I've never heard that before.
He basically described what Daniel had written some 2,500 years earlier. What John is describing in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 4, are the 4 kingdoms as Daniel dreamed about them. A lion, a bear, a leopard, and this strange creature. But Albert, read for us again, run through that again. And again, let's take a look at our chart here. I got the chart. This is the book of Daniel dream chart. This is the metallic man that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about, the 4 world empires, head of gold, chest of silver. Daniel sees it as a winged lion, a bear, a leopard with 4 heads, and a strange-looking beast. Read Revelation 13, and now let's take into consideration Daniel and John are theologically contemporaries, but they are not chronologically contemporary. Daniel is writing his stuff 2,500 years before John is even born, but they're writing about the same thing, almost describing, this is a dream that Daniel is having, and this is a vision that John is being shown in heaven, because it's God that's behind this. This is the supernatural connection that proves that the Word of God is supernatural, and these things must come true. So, as Albert rereads Revelation 13, 1 through 4, I'm going to narrate with my little laser pointer there, and we'll look at the image as Daniel dreamed about it. And remember, Daniel's dream is occurring 2,500 years before what John is writing about that Albert will read now. Read it again.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns.
There's that number 7 and 10 again. 7 horns, 10 horns, 3 were plucked off, leaving 7. That's Daniel. Daniel sees that, but now John is seeing it too, 2,500 years later.
And upon his horns 10 crowns,
okay,
and upon his heads the names of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet whereas the feet
Okay, and what are you reading now?
of a beast, of a bear,
13:2.
Okay.
and his mouth as the mouth of a lion.
Okay, so you got you got the bear and the lion, which are the first two empires that Daniel saw. So there's the lion, Babylon, and the bear, that's Media Persia. Go ahead.
And the dragon gave him his power.
And who's the dragon, guys?
Satan.
Satan is the dragon. We know that from Revelation chapter 13, I think it is. We find out that the dragon is Satan. So Satan is the one behind the power of the Antichrist and the union of these nations into the one world empire. Go ahead.
And the seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the
So
beast.
stop right there. So okay, so we see the leopard, bear, and lion of Daniel's dream from 2,500 years earlier, but then we find out that this Antichrist guy has a deadly head wound. If it's deadly, it means that it kills him. It doesn't put him in the hospital, it doesn't give him a concussion. It's deadly, so it kills him, right? So he's got a deadly wound, Albert, but then what happens to the deadly wound? The deadly wound is healed, Jenny tells us, which means that he was killed and then he got unkilled, which means he was resurrected from the dead. So Antichrist will
He's mimicking what happened to
Exactly. Jenny has summed it up perfectly. He is somehow pulled off with the power of Satan a perverted parody of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we know from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that this is going to be permitted by God. Why? To damn the people who have rejected Jesus.
Yeah.
So Satan, I've heard people say, well, it can't be a resurrection. He must have just got knocked out and he was unconscious for a while. No. God is giving Satan the ability to do whatever he wants during the 70th week. Because 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 says that Antichrist will be able to deceive everybody by way of the great lie and by way of all kinds of power, signs, and lying wonders so that he can make fire come down from heaven and all kinds of incredible things. So Satan is going to be allowed by God to resurrect Antichrist. So when Antichrist comes back from the dead, Albert, what happens to those that are opposing him?
And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast.
Okay, so when Antichrist comes back from the dead, who gets the worship?
the beast.
Well,
Satan.
not Satan, the dragon. They're going to say, but my father did it. My father in heaven brought me back from the dead. So now Satan, who some believe will actually take up residency inside the body of this Nephilim,
The son of Satan.
the Antichrist will be a Nephilim, and that Satan will actually come up and take up residence inside his body. But who gets the praise, honor, and glory? Satan is getting the honor and glory and praise when Antichrist comes back from the dead after the deadly wound is healed. And continue.
And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?
Okay, so that's my point. So when Antichrist comes back from the dead, he dispatches those three kingdoms that rebelled against him. The other seven see, wait a minute, we killed that guy, and he came back from the dead. Like, who can make war with a guy who can't die? All right, so then we wave the white flag, and now Antichrist has this one world government that he's always wanted. So now we roll back to Revelation chapter 17. Now that Antichrist has his one world government, and he's got the other seven nation states or regions of the world under his thumb, and the three that rebelled are gone through the power of Satan. Now we pick it up in verse 12 through 14. See?
And the 10 horns which thou sawest of 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but received power as kings 1 hour with the beast.
Wow.
These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them. For he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful.
Okay, so what we pick up from that then is that, this beast comes back from the dead after being killed, and he's now indwelt by Satan. Satan gets glory. Antichrist is now being worshipped. So when you asked earlier, Albert, when does this stuff happen? What part of the period of tribulation does this happen? I believe that what we just looked at, that all of that plays itself out during the first half of the tribulation period, the first 3.5 years of the 7-year period. Antichrist is using the Mystery Babylon Harlot religious system to consolidate the worship of the world. The Pope is acting as his propaganda minister, his hype man, to get people to come along and follow after him. And once he's able to do that, the temple is rebuilt in Jerusalem, and now he's making his push, because the false prophet has supernatural powers too. He's making his push to be recognized as the one world ruler. And then 3 of the 10 regions of the earth rebel against it and apply. It's like, this guy, he's out of control. He's another Hitler. We got to get rid of this guy, and we're going to split the power amongst ourselves. So they kill him. Satan brings him back to life. When he comes back to life, he destroys the 3. The other 7 bow down and worship him. Now he's the king of the world, and now Satan has his man. That happens, I believe, all the way up to the midway point of the tribulation period. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, we don't really have time to look at it, but we find out then that what happens is that Antichrist, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says, so that Steve, you can flip over to it.
That's his thing.
That's his thing. Read it real quick. We didn't start till like
He's kind of
Run
sure.
through it.
Second Thessalonians.
There you go. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Run straight through that.
Okay. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and by our gathering together unto him, that ye be not soon shaken in mind or be troubled, neither by spirit nor by word, nor by letter from us, nor by letter as from us, as that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
So stop right there. I like that part. So, when I read it, I try to read it with like almost a musical cadence. It says, so that he, as God, enters into the temple of God, showing himself that he, the Antichrist, is God.
Wow.
That's the halfway point of the tribulation. And Steve, what happens?
Okay. Verse 5. Remember ye not that when I was yet with you, I told you these things. And now ye know what withholdeth, that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity doth already work. Only he who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. And then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth, and shall destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the working of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. For this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned, who believe not the truth,
Why?
but had pleasure in unrighteousness.
Wow.
Wow.
So, because they rejected Jesus during our time of sojourn here on the earth, preaching the gospel, God is going to give Satan permission to let the Antichrist do miracles, and even raise the Antichrist from the dead. So we find out there's permission and authority right there in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 from God for the Antichrist and Satan to do these miracle signs and wonders to deceive those people on the earth, because they deserve to be damned because they rejected the gospel when they had a chance to accept it. So, as Dave Hunt pointed out, he says some people might say that's not fair. God's, giving people a strong delusion to believe the lie of Satan and the Antichrist. That's not fair. And he says it is fair. It's giving you the power to believe what you always wanted to believe.
Wow, how about that?
So there you go.
Can't help but wish for it.
Right? So I agree. John Walver agrees. Mark Hitchcock, who's a fairly conservative Bible prophecy writer, he agrees that there's an actual literal resurrection of the Antichrist from the dead. So now, Albert, we close out by getting back to the question you raised. And you said, hey, so when does all of this occur? This happens, I believe, up to the midway point of the tribulation. Antichrist goes into the temple of God after being raised from the dead, and now declares himself to be God. And now that he's God, Albert, we don't need a Mystery Babylon system.
Yeah.
So you were saying, well, when is Mystery Babylon, when is she going to get her comeuppance? Well, you're going to tell us because she's going to get it right now. And I think this is what Albert's about to read for us in verses 15 to 18 to close us out tonight, is what occurs at the midway point of the tribulation after the Antichrist has been risen from the dead, gone down into the bottomless pit, the abuso, been indwelt by Satan himself. We picked that up from different verses we don't have time to look at right now. But when he rises out from the dead, he is now indwelt by Satan himself. Satan wants to be God. He goes into the temple of God now and commits the abomination of desolation that Steve read to us about in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27. When he goes into the temple, he is going to commit the abomination of desolation that Antiochus Epiphanes was a foreshadowing of by going, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, into the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And so now that he's God, Antichrist doesn't need a false harlot. He's going to get himself a quickie divorce, and you're going to tell us all about it. Verses 15 through 18.
And he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples, and multitudes, and nations, and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate, and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city, which reigneth over the kings of the earth.
Excellently well done, Albert. Very good. Gold star for you. Let's break down what you just taught us about.
Yes,
Okay.
please.
So, verse 15, it said, and he saith unto me, so now John is sitting up there getting this narrated to him by one of the angels on assignment from Jesus to explain to John what he's supposed to write down. He says, okay, the waters that thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, these are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. It's like the whole world. And then he says in verse 16, the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, who are the 10 horns? Those are the 10 regional governors that are now under the control totally of Antichrist. Antichrist is going to say, she's of no use to us. Let's get rid of the Vatican. I think they're going to drop a nuclear bomb on Vatican City and annihilate it.
Really? Wow.
And Rome will be no more. The Vatican will be no more. And there's another verse, other verses in it says, rejoice, rejoice, because Babylon's being destroyed. We'll look at that next week. But I think that now Antichrist is going to say, we're going to get rid of Vatican City altogether. Raise it to the ground. Now we got the temple. I am the God of the temple. I don't need the pagan Roman system. Right. So we see the 10 horns under the control of Antichrist shall make her desolate and strip her naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Now, that's a metaphor for the destruction of the Mystery Babylon system. So that woman riding the beast that we kind of see a picture of in our minds, in the metaphysical, she's getting stripped naked and they're cannibalizing her. There's nothing left of her, and what is left, they burn it with fire. So we find out, oh, geez, how did this happen? Well, God was behind the scenes always, pulling the strings, knowing that Satan is a megalomaniacal, genocidal maniac, and also has a big ego. God puts it into the heart of Antichrist and Satan to do what? To fulfill God's will. He's like, hey, Satan, man, now that your man is in charge, might as well go ahead and just get rid of the whore of Babylon. And Satan's like, I got a great idea. We're going to get rid of the whore of Babylon. And you're going to do it. And Antichrist, Dad, that's a great idea, yeah. So, Mystery Babylon meets the Antichrist, and they give birth to the New World Order as one world government. And now, Mom is going to get murdered by her husband. Yes. And so now God put it in the heart of Antichrist to destroy the woman. And now she's no more. And it says, so that, his will can be fulfilled. And then we get to verse 18. It says, the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Now Dave Hunt says clearly There's only one city that's reigned over all the kings of the earth over time, and that city would be what?
Babylon.
Not Babylon. Jenny.
Wrong.
Rome. Yes. Babylon
Exists.
is inside of Rome. So you're partially correct. You're right because you're a more spiritual guy than Jenny is. You said Babylon. It's Babylon spiritually, but it's actually in the literal city of Rome. So Jenny's right. Yes, it's Rome that ruled over the kings of the earth through the Caesars originally, but then that transmogrified into the Babylonian pagan church system of the Roman Catholic Church, which even then killed more people than the Caesars did. When it was the Roman Empire, they killed fewer people than when it became the Roman Catholic Church that had one of the greatest armies ever. And then even after their armies got outstripped by other nations like France or Spain might have had a bigger armada, Spain had a big navy. But the focus, hey, I'll excommunicate you and you'll go to hell. Oh, okay, well, all right, we'll do. So he was manipulating people through religious blackmail. Like, I won't let you go to heaven unless you destroy the British and put Roman Catholicism back in Great Britain. Okay, so Spain will go do the bidding of the Pope, or France will go do the bidding of the Pope, because he'll excommunicate them and send them all to hell. And they were all, oh, I'm evil, I deserve to be in hell. Without you giving me an indulgence, I have no way of getting in. So we find out then that Rome is now destroyed, and what we find out then is this, and we'll be looking at this next week. Now that the city of Rome is no longer needed to be the seat of Mystery Babylon, because Mystery Babylon is destroyed. Next week we're going to look at commercial Babylon. What we're going to see, and what I think happens now, is now Antichrist is going into the temple in Jerusalem pretending to be God. He's destroyed his spiritual headquarters of Mystery Babylon, which is at the Vatican in Rome, and now he sets up a new headquarters for himself, which I believe will be in none other than the actual ancient city of Babylon on the plain of Shinar, which will give us right about here we go. We've got the city of Babylon laid out right here on the plain of Shinar, and Rome is way over to the west. In my other high-tech depiction, here's Rome off to the west. See, that's
There it is.
got Rome way over to the west. It's so far west, you can't even get them on the same map. So you got basically this picture here. You've got Babylon here, and then way over to the west in Rome, this gets destroyed by the Antichrist. And after it gets destroyed by the Antichrist, he then has a religious temple set up for himself, the rebuilt temple of God in Jerusalem right here, and then he sets up his own headquarters in the rebuilt city of Babylon in Iraq, modern day Iraq. And you see that right here on the Euphrates River. So here's Jerusalem, and there's Rome. Rome is no longer in the picture, so we don't need Rome anymore. But we'll look at that next week when we see that commercial Babylon will be dealt her comeuppance next week. Mystery Babylon, the religious system, got her comeuppance today, Albert just told us about. That happens at the midway point of the tribulation period. And now, during the second half of the tribulation period, we'll see the commercial Babylonian system that now replaces the Mystery Babylon system set up at the Vatican in Rome. And Joe Chambers and some others have suggested that as well. That it now relocates a new headquarters to the city of Babylon in Iraq. And there's some interesting passage in Micah chapter 5 that will give support to that. But we won't get to that until next week. So, without further ado then, that's it. If we have questions or comments, I know Jenny, you usually have some interesting things to say.
If you can tell us something about the spirit of iniquity.
Spirit of iniquity. Well, spirit of iniquity is
Mystery of iniquity.
Is
Is it the mystery of iniquity or
The spirit in the what you read is
that's the
spirit of
mystery.
iniquity.
Yeah,
the mystery of iniquity?
Yeah, the mystery of iniquity. In other words, and thank you for pointing that out, because I was going to say, spirit of iniquity, that's throughout the Bible. It'll take 3 hours, but I like to talk. No, the mystery of iniquity that's talked about is, in other words, saying, what's the secret of this wicked woman.
Mhm.
The mystery is that it was Satan dressed in drag, that it began not just in the city of ancient Babylon on the plain of Israel. It started in the Garden of Eden with Satan and Eve offering her and her accepting the goddess position. She didn't do it on purpose because she was a bad person. She was tempted by goddesshood. But then when it gets to Nimrod and Semiramis, Semiramis is an evil, wicked witch. And the mystery of iniquity now comes out in the open. But when Shem kills Nimrod for doing the blood sacrifices and killing children, the mystery of iniquity of satanic blood sacrifices, which is what the mystery Babylon system is. In Babylon, it didn't have to be a mystery system. It was out in the open because the king was the guy doing it. But after the king gets killed, and now you have people that fear God like Shem and Noah preaching about the God of Israel, and then you have the nation of Israel being established later and the kings of Israel with armies. This wicked, satanic witchcraft cult has to go underground, lest in the kingdom of Israel you can be stoned to death for that stuff. And so as Israel gains more power and the word of God spreads more around the world, and then particularly after the church comes along, the mystery, the Babylonian system of blood sacrifices, worshiping the fertility sky goddess and her sun god husband, who was also a fire god, by burning your kids, that has to go into secret. And so the satanic practices have to be hidden, and they've been hidden throughout the ages in different things. We saw it creeping into Judaism, we saw it creeping into the church, we see it hiding in Freemasonry, so that you have these occultic Babylonian symbologies. When we talked last week about who weeps for the widow's son, being one of the passages from a Masonic manual, we've got ancient Babylonian Satan worship hidden in the Freemasonic system, and it controls our courts and
government,
professional associations. So it's hiding today as the mystery of iniquity. But when it comes out in Revelation, it won't have to hide anymore. It'll be the one world religion. But then, once Antichrist becomes God himself and goes into the temple of God, showing himself that he's God, he doesn't have to have a mystery, because he's going to be the God of the world, and there isn't going to be anybody to contend against him. So right now, we see Babylonian paganism hiding in the Catholic Church through Catholic rituals. We see it hiding in Freemasonry through fraternal and Masonic rituals that are clearly, as we find laid out in the two Babylons, clearly relates back to Nimrod Semiramis Babylonian paganism, but it has to be hidden because there's still Christians here. The church is still here. The church is the restrainer of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. The Holy Spirit by and through the church. When the church is removed at the rapture and the false church is left behind, the restraint will be taken off. And the mystery of iniquity will no longer have to be in hiding. It'll be able to come out. And during that tribulation period, we saw the halfway point. Remember, the bottomless pit is opened up. Fallen angels are released from the prison in Tartarus. Satan is cast down from heaven. So now he's no longer in just the second heaven. He's, I think, looking now, after Antichrist goes in the temple and declares himself to be God, which just happened tonight, shortly after that, God throws Satan out of both the second and third heaven and exiles him to the planet Earth. So now you got Satan walking around on Earth with all of the fallen angels. So it's going to be a pure nightmare. It's going to be Halloween come to life. You got demons and monsters actually walking around in physical bodies interacting with humans, which is why Daniel said this last kingdom of the Antichrist will be partly strong and partly weak. It's going to have weak human beings with Adamic DNA mixed together with Nephilim supermen who are monstrosities, and they're not going to cling together, they're not going to get along. And so the humans are going to be a great risk, and that's why 70% of the population of the planet Earth will be killed off towards the end of the tribulation period. And by the end of the 1260 days of the Great Tribulation period, no human will be left alive if it went past 1260 days. And for those days it was shortened so that the elect could be
Very
saved.
thought-provoking.
So there you have it. That's the mystery of iniquity. And so next week we'll pick it up. But Albert, why don't you close out in a word of prayer, and then we'll pick it up next week if the rapture doesn't happen.
Dear Lord, thank you, Jesus, for another great Bible study. Thank you for the enlightenment, the wisdom, the knowledge that has come from this Bible study, dear Lord. To us and those who have been watching on the internet, Dear Lord, bless us, protect us, keep us safe, dear Jesus. Bring us back next week to your glory, to your knowledge. And if we're not here, it's because we're with you, dear Lord, in your heavenly realm. In the name of Jesus, amen, amen, and amen.
Man, Albert, great prayer.
No, Secrets does great prayers.
I like your enthusiasm.